That is going live. And when I say that we're going to connect all the dots, you know the story, they say, of a 75-year-old woman. She comes to the doctor, and the doctor gives her a checkup and says, everything seems good. What do you do with yourself all day? She says, well, I hang out with my friends, I play, I do well. He says, it looks like you're going to live very long. How long did your mother live? Says, my mother? She's still alive. She's 89. And how's she doing? She's doing very well. She goes out and exercises every day. She plays with her friends, and she loves playing mahjong. Very good. Wow. And how old was her mother when she died? Her mother? She's still alive. She's 107. And what does she do all day? She's very good. She goes out, she shops, she enjoys life. Until when did her mother live? Her mother, she's still alive. Anyway, what the point is that there's everything in Torah is very deeply connected, and what we're going to learn today is how connected every story in the Torah, every biblical story really is. We take for granted that these are nice stories. They happened with people a long time ago. Yes, they have good lessons. But when we learn it today, we're going to see that the deeper meaning, the deeper mystical teachings from the Hasidus and the Kabbalah, that the connection that they have is really, really incredible. And this is what we're going to bring home today. So as we did in previous lessons, we're going to begin with a video. I'll put it on here. And then I will also put it on the big screen. Gotta do this both. Okay.
Joseph was 17 years old, shepherding with his brothers in the flocks, and Joseph brought bad word of them to their father. Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, as he was a child of old age to him, and he made him a striped coat. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and they hated him, and they were not able to speak peaceably with him.
No, sorry, mistake.
Joseph dreamed a dream and told his brothers, "Here we were bundling sheaves in the middle of the field, and here my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And here your sheaves surrounded, and they bowed to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Shall you then reign over us, or will you rule over us?" And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. He again dreamed another dream and related it to his brothers, and he said, "Here I have dreamed another dream, and behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing to me." His brothers and his father guarded the matter.
Things come to a head when, one day, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers, who are out shepherding the flocks in the countryside.
They saw him from afar, and when he had yet to come near to them, they schemed against him to put him to death. And they said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Now let us go and kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, 'An evil beast has devoured him,' and we shall see what will become of his dreams."
Reuben, the eldest of the brothers, dissuades the others from committing outright murder, suggesting that, instead, they throw him into one of the pits out there in the wilderness.
When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his coat, the striped coat that was on him. and they took him and threw him into the pit. They sat down to eat bread, and they lifted their eyes and they saw, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead. And Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but our hand shall not be upon him, as he is our brother, our flesh." His brothers listened, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. They took Joseph's coat, and they slaughtered a hairy goat, and they dipped the coat in the blood. They sent the striped coat to their father, and they said, "We found this. Please recognize. Is it your son's coat or not?" He recognized it and said, "My son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Torn. Joseph is torn." And he mourned his son many days.
His brothers listened, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt.
1 second, we're catching up here.
Just slaughtered a hairy goat, and they dipped the coat in the blood. They sent the striped coat to their father, and they said, "We found this. Please recognize. Is it your son's coat or not?" He recognized it and said, "My son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Torn. Joseph is torn." And he mourned his son many days.
Yes.
Online, we're a drop behind here. That's what we were showing here. So what we see over here is a very fascinating story. And if, like I said, if anyone wants to see the coat, we have the coat right here. You can see it live. You see that? Well, Wally, can you come up here? Because there's people watching online. Just show it to, they're looking there. This is Joseph's coat, for those who wanted to see it.
And this is the rehearsal coat from the 1988 production on Broadway.
Wow.
And I had the privilege at one point in my career of playing Jacob.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Kind of like you playing the rabbi. Oh my.
Well, we will see that Jacob was quite a trickster. Okay, so thank you for that. So what we see over here is obviously a story that brings up a lot of questions, and why it was we're going to get to, and we're going to get to some explanations of this because there's a lot of questions that goes along with it. But first, we're going to take a look at the second half of the story. And the second half of the story is the reconciliation, where they once again meet, where they once again get together in Egypt, and finally where it culminates with Joseph revealing himself to his brothers. So we're going to continue showing over here the next part. And play this over here.
Joseph was 17 years old.
The next segment we will read is from Genesis chapter 45, and it occurs 22 years after the selling of Joseph. In the interim, this is what happened. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court. Joseph was immensely successful in everything that he did, and he was put in charge of all his master's affairs. Potiphar's wife lusted after the beautiful and charismatic young slave, and she tried to seduce him. When Joseph rejected her advances, Potiphar's wife had him thrown into prison. After many years in prison, Joseph gained his freedom when he successfully interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, which predicted 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh appointed Joseph viceroy of Egypt, and Joseph's successful planning saved the entire region from starvation. The famine also engulfed the land of Israel, and Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to purchase grain. Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize him. Joseph accused his brothers of being spies. Taking one of the brothers as a hostage, he forced them to bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt. At first, Jacob refused to send Benjamin to Egypt, but the famine was in full force, and soon their food ran out. Finally, Judah persuaded Jacob by vowing to assume personal responsibility for Benjamin's safety. When the brothers came to Egypt for the second time, Joseph framed Benjamin by planting his silver goblet in Benjamin's sack. He arrested the brothers and declared that Benjamin will remain in Egypt as his slave. Judah approaches Joseph to plead for Benjamin's release, offering himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. This is what happens next.
Joseph was no longer able to constrain himself, and he called, "Remove every man from my presence." And no man stood with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He put his voice to weeping, and Egypt heard, and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers could not answer him, as they were bewildered before him. And Joseph said to his brothers, "And now do not be distressed, and it should not upset you that you sold me here. For as a source of livelihood, God has sent me before you. It is not you who sent me here, but God. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'So said your son Joseph, God has placed me master to all of Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay.'"
And that is how Jacob and his 12 sons, who would become the 12 tribes of Israel,
this
ended
is
up
the
in
story
Egypt.
of Joseph. And now we're going to, normally I would open it up for questions, but there's a lot that I want to get to today. And there's so many questions here. So we're going to focus on two main questions today. And the two questions are, simply put, what is the brothers' actions? What's this? You're talking about brothers selling Joseph into slavery. What are they thinking? What are they doing? You're not talking here about Esau and Jacob. Esau was known to be an evil one. You're talking over here about brothers who became the fathers of the Jewish people, right? These are the founders of the 12 tribes. And what is it that they done? If anybody was here Yom Kippur in the afternoon, after the outdoor service that we did Yisker, and as we do every year. So we read very late in the afternoon. It's about 3-4 o'clock, closer to 3 o'clock. And we read the story about the 10 martyrs. And the story of the 10 martyrs, about how the Romans said to the rabbis at the time, Joseph was sold into slavery and they're punishable by death. So therefore, since they were never punished, so we're going to have to punish you instead. And then it goes on the whole story with the 10 martyrs. But anyway, what is the first question is the brothers' actions. And the second one is Joseph's behavior, because that's also very strange. Because the way he responds, in the end, it seems very strange. He seems to first do all these weird things, tell them, bring back your brother, and, putting the goblet in and doing all this kind of stuff. And then finally he reveals himself, and they feel all bad. And he says, don't feel bad. It's not you. It's all good. And he's comforting them. Very strange. Let's take a look at Rabbi Yeshaya Horowitz, the Shnei Luchat Habris. Let's first take a look at the brothers' motives. Text number 3. Before explaining how the story of selling Joseph and all that happened with him is a basis for the kingdom of David and Mashiach, must address the great difficulties with the story. First of all, most general difficulty, the greatness of the sons of Jacob, the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel, is well known. Certainly they were greater than the supernal angels, as they represent the mystical 12 configurations of the divine name Avaya. How then could the mind grasp the idea that these exalted individuals would join together to commit the most severe sin of all the sins of the world, namely the sin of murder? So, and then, as I said, Joseph's side of the story also is very questionable. So let's begin with the brothers. Okay, we're going to begin with the brothers and try and give a little bit of a perspective on it. I know that it may not satisfy 100% ultimately what they did, but let's just try and get a little bit of perspective from a few different places so that we can at least see a little bit where are they coming from. So when we come to the brothers' behaviors, part of the blame for them is not only themselves, but also their father, Jacob. Because, as the Talmud says, text number 4, a person should never discriminate between his children. Look at what happened on account of 2 selahs weight of fine spun wool that Jacob bestowed upon Joseph more than his other children, provoking their jealousy and causing their forefathers to end up in Egypt. Right? And yet we're still wearing that coat many years later. What is the point over here? That Jacob did have a little bit of part of it. He showed favoritism to Joseph, and that caused the jealousy. And to the extent that the Talmud says that we have to learn that we should not treat one child more than the other because of the jealousy that could bring about, because it could bring about discrimination. So Joseph too appears to have contributed to the animosity. Okay, he was the favorite son, but he also provoked that on, and he said, hey, I have dreams, and he starts predicting things, and he starts recounting things that happen. But still, all that being said, the brother's response is also quite extreme. We understand that there is a concept of preferential treatment by a parent, but it doesn't mean that you go and you sell a brother, that you go and, God forbid, kill a brother. There is a lot of the idea of, family issues and family jealousy, but sibling rivalry, but this is a little bit extreme. So again, to give just a little bit of perspective, and it's not going to answer everything, but let's just a little perspective. Text number 5. It's from Avadia ben Sefornu, known as the Sefornu, one of the commentaries on the Torah. He says, they saw Joseph as one who was plotting to destroy them physically and spiritually, or both together. And the Torah states, one who is coming to kill you, make haste and kill him first. So they saw Joseph as a threat to them. And if he is putting a threat to us, then we have to go and respond in kind and make sure that threat doesn't come to fruition. And this is a mitzvah in the Torah. The mitzvah of the Torah is not do not kill, it's do not murder. If you are being attacked, according to the Torah, you could retaliate. Now, a little bit more to take this a step further, text number 6. Why did they see this as a threat? Because when they saw that of all the children, Jacob loved only Joseph, they thought that what would happen to them will be the same as what happened to Ishmael and the children of Keturah vis-a-vis Isaac. and Esau vis-a-vis Jacob. They believed that as long as Joseph was alive, they would have no portion in the God of Israel, and their descendants would be excluded from the blessing given to Abraham and Isaac, to be a God to you and to your descendants after you. This belief was confirmed by them by the fact that they saw that until now, only one of the children of each of the patriarchs merited this blessing. So this is, again, to bring a little bit more perspective to what we are saying now. So why did they feel threatened? So it's very simple. You have like this. You had Abraham, and he had two sons. He had the Isaac and Ishmael. Then you had, and who got it? Only one of them. Only one son. Isaac got it. Okay. Then you had the next one. You had Jacob, and he also, he was also only one, Jacob and Esau. And finally, they said, out of 11 brothers, only one could take the blessings in the future. So who would that be? So they assumed that, of course, that would be Joseph. And this is where they and this is where they said, we are acting in self-defense. Why? We are protecting ourselves from being thrown under the bus, because we saw what happened in previous generations. Only one child gets that. Abraham had 8 children, not 2. Right? And yet everything went to Isaac. Okay, Esau was only 2, Isaac's children, and we talked about that at length in the last class, Jacob and Esau. But then you have the last one, Jacob, 11, ultimately 12, but they said that the 12th one was his brother, so they looked at him as a threat. So this is one perspective. Okay, it was an act of self-defense, maybe not that they were necessarily afraid that Joseph is going to kill them per se, but they saw him as a threat to their future. They saw that they have no future with Joseph around, because they saw how he was being treated as the one who is going to have the covenant. The preferential treatment was a process of elimination of the other brothers. So they, just like Ishmael and Esau were being excluded, they too were being excluded. Of course, this was a mistake on their part, but nevertheless, this is what and they saw it also as a threat to their spiritual existence, right? Spiritual death. Maybe nothing would have happened to them physically, but spiritually, their hopes of the tradition coming from God is going to be over, going to be lost. There's another explanation, which is a sovereignty issue. And this will give us a little bit more perspective of why Judah was the one who suggested him being sold. The crown of sovereignty, again, next text number 7. The crown of sovereignty is granted to Judah. However, were it to have been preceded by kingship of Joseph in Egypt, the kingship of Judah would have never been materialized, as the people of Israel would not have become a nation. God forbid, for Joseph is the channel. Joseph's brothers failed to understand this. Rather, they thought that Joseph was seeking the sovereignty permanently and exclusively for himself and his descendants. They therefore judged him by the law of Torah, concluding that he is deserving of death, as one who is contesting the sovereignty of the house of David. For one who contests sovereignty of the house of David, it is as if he contested a divine presence. Now, this is true that in Jewish law, if someone contests the sovereignty of a Jewish king, which Judah is the king, right? We know David comes from Judah, so it's considered a crime of high treason, and therefore it is punishable by death. Now, we're going to get back to this later, because this is going to be part of our discussion. So keep this in mind. This is from the Shalah, Shnei Luchas Abris, known as Rishaya Horowitz. And this is a very significant perspective in our discussion as we're going to go on. But first, before that, we're going to now put this whole story, everything that we said, we're going to put it on the side. Because in order to really understand what is the conflict between Joseph and his brothers, it really goes back to a conflict that began all the way from what we talked about last week. Now, we're not going to rehash the story from last week, but we're going to bring in a very, very interesting twist to the whole story. And that is, before Joseph is born, his mother Rachel, their mother is Leah. Okay. Now, as we're going to see, that there is a very interesting divide between these two, Rachel and Leah. Because if we take a look back at the story, Rachel and Leah, which, by the way, we read in this week's Torah portion, it's interesting that it's going along the Torah portions. We're going to read about the wedding and all that took place. And we're going to see that there's something that runs very deep, not only in the brothers, but in the source where they come from. For that, we're going to take a look again at the text. That's on this week's Torah portion, just to note. We're going to read this story today and tomorrow in the Torah reading. And it's a story of Jacob and the two daughters as he went to Laban, Leah and Rachel. So let's get that playing here.
Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. The eyes of Leah were tender, and Rachel was of beautiful form and beautiful appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban said, "Better I give her to you than I give her to another man. Stay with me." Jacob worked for Rachel 7 years, and they were in his eyes as a few days in his love for her. And Jacob said to Laban, "Bring here my wife, as my days are fulfilled, and I will come to her." Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. It was in the evening, and he took his daughter Leah and brought her into him, and he came to her. It was in the morning, and behold, she is Leah. And he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Have I not served with you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" And Laban said, "It is not so done in our place to give the younger before the firstborn."
Laban, however, agrees to allow Jacob to marry Rachel as well, in exchange for another 7 years of labor.
He came also to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked with him yet another 7 years.
And that is how Jacob ended up marrying both Leah and Rachel. Leah proceeded to have 4 children, one right after the other: Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah, while Rachel remained childless. Determined to participate in the creation of the people of Israel, Rachel asked Jacob to marry her maidservant Bilhah and have children with her. That union produced Dan and Naphtali. Not to be outdone, Leah had Jacob marry her maidservant Zilpah, which produced 2 more children, Gad and Asher. Then Leah had another 3 children of her own, 2 sons and a daughter, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. Finally, Rachel's prayers were answered, and she conceived a child. Joseph was born. 8 years later, Rachel had a second son, but she tragically died in childbirth. The boy was named Benjamin.
So now we see that there is more than just the story the way it is. It really goes back to already the mothers. And so now we understand Jacob's preferential treatment to Joseph, because who was Joseph? Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel. That was the child he was always looking for. He was always waiting for. This was the woman that was his match, the one that he always wanted. Even though chronologically speaking, he had 10 older sons, but this was to him this is my firstborn. And if you take a look at the original text 1:8, line 28, 29, it says his brothers envied him, but his father guarded the matter. His father guarded the matter because in a sense, he was looking for it to happen. He wanted to see, will this actually happen? That Joseph will become the king that he's claiming to be? Will these dreams actually come to fruition, come to life? And this also explains why Jacob was so fearful about sending the second child, Benjamin. Why didn't he send Benjamin with the brothers? Benjamin wasn't that young, by the way. He had 10 children of his own at that time. It sounds like he's a little 10-year-old kid. He wasn't. So he was an adult, but Jacob didn't want to send him. What was it that he didn't want to risk? He said, losing the second son of Rachel. Exactly. So we could start to understand what was the deep feelings of jealousy by the brothers. Because now we see that the other children, it wasn't only about Joseph being Joseph. It was also something that goes back to their mothers. It was something that goes back to where they came from. They had the majority of the children. They were the firstborn chronologically. And yet they see that their father still refuses to recognize that. Their father still looks at Joseph as a special one. And they see there's a connection here. He loves Rachel, not our mother. So this is a very deep-rooted animosity that's going on for a long time. And so this is a planted seed for the rift between Rachel's firstborn and Leah under the leadership of Yehuda. Even after he had reconciled with his brothers, this divide did not end, and actually it continues to appear many times over in Jewish history, as we're going to see, so it doesn't really end there. So this explains parental treatment to Joseph, Joseph supported by dreams, protective Benjamin, and the brothers' jealousy. Put that in here too. Okay. So this is, if so, a very crazy story. But there's more to it.
Yeah.
If it ends there, there's more to it. The inner structure of the Jewish people is formed The inner structure of the Jewish people is formed by 12 tribes of Israel. And this is very important for the repercussions of the Jewish history, that it has to be done in that way. And they knew, Jacob knew, Leah knew, Rachel knew, that there's going to be 12 tribes. But in knowing so, there were two players on either side, if you will. There was Rachel and Leah, but it actually goes back to a previous story. And that is the story of none other than the stolen blessings about last week. The stolen blessings, what does it have to do with the story of Leah and Rachel? Well, let's take a look at some parallels in the story. Number one, Jacob manipulates him into selling the firstborn rights, and he steals the blessings. Laban says to Jacob, wait, something is wrong here. No, sorry, let me take a step back. Let's look at some of the, we're first going to read in the text before I put it up on the board. That's right. So let's take a look at step number one. When Jacob gets married to Leah, how did that happen? So many of us heard the story. He comes to his uncle Laban and he says, I love your daughter, Rachel. Lavan says, sure, work for me for 7 years, and you got her. Okay? It's one day, it's happening so quickly, everything is good. And then comes the night of the wedding. Comes the night of the wedding, as we know what happens. He gives her, instead of Rachel, he gives Leah. Now you say, this seems like a very dirty trick. And not only that, did he really not know it was Leah? It means that Leah and Rachel had to be on this as much as Laban did. So let's see what happens. Text number 9. This is from the Medrash. All that night, Jacob was calling to her Rachel, and she responded in kind. Then in the morning, she was Leah, as the Torah says. The Torah says, in the morning, she was Leah. What do you mean in the morning she was Leah? The night she wasn't Leah. So in other words, Leah played along the whole time as being Rachel. Good enough to fool him, so to speak. Said Jacob to her, deceiveress, the daughter of a deceiver. Was I not calling you Rachel, and you are answering me? She said to him, every teacher has his pupils. When your father was calling you Esav, did you not answer him in the same way? Now, this is not just, a little play on the game, because there's really much more to it. Everybody knew that she was destined, as we're soon going to see, that she was destined to be for Esav. We're going to see that soon. But before we see that, now we see a parallel too. If you go to text number 8 in the text, lines 30 and 32. Where is it? And Laban said, it is not done so in our place to give the younger before the firstborn. Now, this is very interesting wording, because in the beginning, it says there was a younger daughter and an older daughter. And then he came to Laban and said, what are you doing to me? You're tricking me. So he said, this is not what's usually the way we usually say, to give the younger before what? Before the firstborn, right? It's not only the younger and the older. He pointed this out, the firstborn. What was he trying to say? He says that there is something about the firstborn. Jacob, Esav, firstborn, the second one. Who gets the blessing? The firstborn gets the blessing. Okay? So, this is what Laban says to Jacob. It's not done in art to give the younger before to the firstborn. Now, later on in the deception, what happens? Jacob says to Isaac, is this you, my son Esav? And he says, I am. Well, Jacob says to Leah, why am I not calling you? And you were answering me that I am.
The opposite, right? Isaac should say that to Jacob. Number 2.
Well, it's saying Jacob's response.
Oh.
Jacob's response is that, that I am Esav. That's, right? And then the same thing, Jacob says to Leah, and what does she answer? Well, maybe it doesn't really fit with the two, but okay, whatever. You get the point. And she says, I'm calling you Rachel. And she says, yeah, I'm Rachel, just like you did. Okay, now it's getting even more interesting. And then what happens next? The skin of the goats. What happens? They came and we have there in the text 1b, they slaughtered a hairy goat and they dipped the coat in blood. They sent the striped coat and brought it to their father. And they said, we found this, please recognize, is it your son's coat or not? What is the idea of the coat? And what did they dip, which kind of blood did they use? That of a goat's skin, right? Where else did we see about the goats, right? We found the same story with Jacob and Esav. He took the skin of a goat and dressed it in its hands. So again, we find this thing with the goat. We're not going to go very deep into the significance of the goat, but we see there's a parallel here between the two. By the way, if you want this, I see you're taking pictures of the slides. If you want the slides, you can get them all online at myjli.com/Bible, and you could get all the slides online. And that's for those of you watching as well, and the videos too. So we see a very interesting thread of deception here. Let's take a look at text number 11 from the Zohar, the Kabbalah. Jacob was correct in acting as he did. Nevertheless, because he presented a hairy goat to deceive his father that he is on his side, he was punished with another hairy goat, whose blood his children presented to him. Regarding Jacob, it is said, on the skins of the goat kids she dressed upon his hands and upon the smoothness of his neck. Because of this, they dipped Joseph's coat in the blood and presented him the coat to deceive him. It all corresponds one to another. So it sort of sounds like here you have this master of deception here. And what's going on? So are you saying that the whole Jewish people are based on a bunch of trickery and thieves, God forbid? What's going on over here? What does this all mean? And what's with all this deception? It turns out that we have a thread of deception. You have first the Jacob stealing the blessings. And then you have Laban tricking Jacob into marrying Leah. And then you have the brothers selling Joseph. And it's all done in this sort of way of deception. Again, even when they sold him, they didn't go and say he died, taking the coat with the goat skin. It's all very much interconnected. Fascinating, isn't it? So what does that all mean? So now we've put the dots together, so we have the picture, but now can we explain this picture? Let's first bring in another aspect to this story. And with this, we're going to start to put things a little bit into perspective. When we talked about Leah and Rachel, what did we read? We read in text number 8, the eyes of Leah were tender, and Rachel was of beautiful form and beautiful appearance. Is that a nice thing to say? That Leah was ugly and Rachel was beautiful? So there is a deeper significance to what this is actually saying. Text number 12, the Talmud. Leah heard people talking. Rebecca has 2 sons, and Laban has two daughters. The elder will marry the elder, and the younger will marry the younger. She would sit at the crossroads and inquire, how does the elder son conduct himself? He is a wicked man, a highway robber. How does the younger son conduct himself? A wholesome man dwelling in tents. So she wept until her eyelashes fell out. So the specific definition of her looks goes by her eyes that were tender. Why? Because of her crying. Because she saw that she was destined to be with Esau. Now, it's not only a story about Yentas talking and, let's see, is Yankel good for not Schmerl, but Rebecca, can we make the match? The matchmakers, fiddler on the roof, matchmaker, make me a match. It's not only about that. On a deeper sense, this means that they are soulmates. It means that they are very deeply connected. Rachel fits with Jacob. Leah fits with Esau. Why? Now, for those of you who were here last week, you remember that we talked about Esau in his source not being such a bad guy as he's presented to be. In his source, he's considered a very powerful force. And the difference between the two was in other words, the difference between Isaac and Rebecca in their viewpoint of Esav was not whether or not Esav deserves the blessing. It was whether or not Esav at this point has the capability of bringing out what his, what his life mission, what his life purpose is. That was really their difference. But they both agreed that there is a very powerful aspect to Esav. So to bring this into another way, and again, the dispute that's going on between the children. You have Jacob's children, you have those who are the Rachel side, and you have those who are the Leah side. And they're each coming from a different place. So let's see a Hasidic interpretation of the two. And this is the difference between what we know as a tzaddik or a Baal Teshuvah. Text number 13. The essential difference between the two groups within the tribes of Israel is that the primary focus of the children of Leah is the service of Teshuvah, which is usually translated as repentance. And the focus of Rachel's children, Joseph and Benjamin, is the service of tzaddikim, of the righteous. The source of the connected to the service of masters of return, and Rachel is connected to the service of perfectly righteous. This is the meaning of the verse. Rachel was beautiful form and beautiful appearance. Rachel indicates the service of the perfectly righteous, of beautiful form and beautiful appearance without blemish. So in a spiritual sense, it means the perfectly, the beautiful is referring to the tzaddikim, to the righteous ones who have nothing wrong. They're those of perfection, spiritual perfection. They're doing everything right. Everything is in play. Regarding Jacob, it is said, Jacob loved Rachel because, as far as Jacob himself is concerned, his primary task in life is the service of the perfectly righteous. As it says, Jacob was a wholesome man, a dweller of tents. His achievements are in the inside, within the realm of holiness, rather than venturing out to elevate the outside to holiness. This is the deeper meaning of what the sages relate, that people are saying Rebekah has 2 sons, and Laban has 2 daughters. The elder will marry the elder, and the younger will marry the younger. Leah's life mission is the service of the master of return, indicates her task is to return back Esav to goodness. Not so Rachel, whose mission is the service of the perfectly righteous. This is the service. You have 2 different types. You have those who are of perfection, of beauty, and I'm not like that. Maybe some of you are. And then you have those who are the regular people. It's not working. The regular people, so to speak. And that is the ones who are constantly pursuing return, constantly engaging with the world, constantly dealing with the challenges of life, constantly dealing with the troubles that they're facing, and constantly struggling back and forth. The difference between a tzaddik and a Baal Teshuvah, a tzaddik and a man of return. And every person has their unique path in life. These 2 general paths is what we find in a general sense in the Jewish way. The tzaddik only deals with holy spiritual things. He steers clear of anything that's evil, of anything that's coarse, of anything that's materialistic, focuses only on his God. Tzaddik, as Jacob, is a dweller of tents. What does it mean, a dweller of tents? I'm staying focused on my study, on my service, on my godly service. I'm not dealing with the outside. I'm not going out to hunt. Hunt in this case meaning dealing with the challenges of the world, going and tackling the things that are coming at us at life. So tzaddik is beautiful form, beautiful appearance. Everything is good. There's nothing wrong. What could go wrong with a very righteous, holy person? Baal Teshuvah, on the other hand, which is most people that are created in the form of much more of those as far as the children of Jacob goes, they venture in the world, they engage with the coarseness, with its imperfections, a materialism. They have to go work, they got business to do, they have a life to take care of, they have challenges that come their way, they have to navigate the treacherous territory of the animalistic impulses. That's the idea, going out and hunting animals. What does it mean? It means that we're dealing with our animal side, internal desires and struggles, our internal demons that are constantly nagging at us. That's the Baal Teshuvah. So it's nothing that's wrong with such a person, but they're not that beautiful as the way they present themselves, because it's a person who is constantly going through these challenges of life. So beautiful doesn't only mean beautiful physically, but it also means spiritually beautiful.
Rabbi, I just have a comment that the way it's worded, though, pursues perfection, just like we have the right to pursue happiness, doesn't mean that we're going to be happy. We can just pursue it. So I can't see how a human being can be perfectly righteous.
There's different levels of a tzaddik.
Right.
Okay, so it's from Moses all the way till those who are, if you learn Tanya, there's many different levels of a tzaddik.
Right.
So now we can Jacob and Esav, and then how that plays out into the next step in the story. You have the struggle, Jacob and Esav, the tzaddik and the Baal Teshuvah, the righteous and the return individual. And so both of these have parallel roles, the way they play out in the next generation. Next generation means the way they play out in their soul's mission. Have Esav, who his job is to develop a material world, and you have Jacob's mission, which is to develop a spiritual world. Now, as we said last week, and this is just very short to go over this. Last week we explained that there was a difference between Esav and Rebekah. Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac said, this is Esav's mission, this is Jacob's mission. They each have their thing. Let me give the blessing of the material world, Mishmane Haaretz, the fat of the land. Let me give the blessing to the destined for that. Who is that? Esav. Rebekah said, there's a problem. Because Esav has already been corrupted by the material world. And so therefore, Jacob had to come with the mastery, with the trickery. He had to bring the deception. Now he has to come with deception. So now the deception means, what does the deception mean? It doesn't mean he's just tricking. Be careful what I say, I have a magician here. Doesn't mean he's only tricking. But what does it mean? It means he has to take with something that he's really not. I'm playing out something that's not my mission. I'm now playing two sides. I'm playing two missions. I'm playing the mission of Jacob, and I'm also playing the mission of Esav. So that's already something that's deceptive in the sense that this is not really me. I have to play this out. Now, why does it have to be in this way? So this really goes back all the way to the very, very first class. Now you see how it's even more deeply connected. Where was the very first deception? The snake, that's right. And his job is to correct what was messed up in the Garden of Eden. Because what happened? What did the Garden of Eden? We explained in the very first lesson. What happened in the Garden of Eden? The biggest problem was that it became a mix between good and evil, good and bad. Now everything is confused. When everything is confused and you don't know its place, you don't know its purpose, you don't know its mission, then you have to start and unwind everything. You see? See how everything is deeply connected? Now Yaakov was reluctant to assume this responsibility. He told his mother, no, it's not me. I'm a different person than Esav. How are you going to do this? Esav is a hairy man, right? Hairy. Each of them, again, represents that idea. He's saying, it's not really me. Rebecca said, no, this is you. This is you. You have to do it. And so he took the blessings. But now, he's at the next stage in life. And the next stage, when he has to bring this on to his children, who does he want to pass on the future to? He picks Rachel. So he didn't fully get the message. If he really got the message, he would want to go for Leah, right? Because it's make mission. But Jacob's mission, who's the master of both worlds, the problem is that he is still desiring Rachel. But if he's only developing a spiritual world, then good. Then that's the right one. But the problem is you got to do both. You got to do Esav's job too. So you got to marry Leah as well. And how does he marry Leah? Again, that comes about deception. She says, "But I thought you're Rachel." She says, "No. Don't you know? You got Esav's job too. Remember what you told your father? That you're Esav." In other words, what's she saying to him? Remember that you said you're taking the mission of Esav on your life purpose as well? You're going to do Esav's job? You want Esav, you got to take me too. Because that's me. I'm the one who's the struggler in life. I'm the one who's dealing with the physical challenges of the world. You see my eyes, right? I'm the one that's constantly fighting and struggling with myself. My sister is beautiful. She's the tzaddik. She's the righteous. She's perfect. I'm the one that's, working my way through. So you want to take Esav's space? You want to take his blessings? You got to take me too, because I'm part of that mission in life. Yeah.
By the way, I just find it interesting that Rivka was the mastermind behind the whole thing.
Yes.
Behind the deception. And then when she sends him off to Haran, she says, because of what you did.
Well, okay,
There you go.
That's why it says that not only Rivka, we find by Sarah as well. Very similar story. What happened with Sarah? Abraham said, "Let me keep Ishmael," and Sarah said, "No, it has to be Yitzchak." So it does say that the mothers had more divine inspiration than the fathers did. They were much more righteous than the forefathers. But now we understand why she favors Joseph. At the end of the day, he says, "But this is me. Joseph is my kid. He's Rachel's son. He's the one that's the tzaddik," which is why Joseph was not affected by the world that he went into. Joseph went to a very difficult place, as we'll see. And now we'll understand when we talk about repentance, when we talk about returning. Now we get back to the original story. Change back that clock. All right. Now we have to get back to the original story, the Joseph one. Yeah.
Chronologically, couldn't the selling of Joseph happen before the going in the pit as a way? I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe since the Torah doesn't go in a chronological order, the Torah seems to be setting up. In other words, when they threw Joseph into the pit, maybe the pit represented Egypt, where there was nothing there except for wild animals and danger. So when Joseph
Okay, there's more that could be explained with this. I'll give you just another food for thought, which is not really part of the class. But the story of Dinah, who is Leah's daughter, and says she was going out to see the daughters of the land. And the Hasidic explanation to that is she learned from her mother, who was going out to reach out to the world. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that, but we see how this plays out in many, many ways. And as a matter of fact, that Jacob hid Dinah from Esav when he met her, and God was not happy about that. He wanted her, Dinah, to marry Esav, to maybe bring him back. Anyway, just some other ways that the story plays out in different ways. If you read the story in detail, it's all very, very deeply connected, all these stories. So now we go back to the first question. As we wondered, is Joseph, he indeed harbored animosity towards his brothers. So then what is the whole idea of him going back and forth and doing this whole spiel? And then suddenly he says, no, I love you guys. Don't worry. It's not you. And the divide between the children of Leah and the children of Joseph, of Rachel, now becomes clear. Because Maimonides says like this. Let's see. Maimonides, what is tshuva? What does it mean when we say teshuva? Repentance. What does repentance mean? What constitutes full teshuva, repentance? When a person is presented with the same sin they transgressed and has the opportunity to again transgress, yet refrains from doing it. For example, a person who engaged in forbidden relations with a woman and is subsequently alone with her, and his love for her is just as strong, and his physical prowess is not diminished, and he is in the same surroundings as he was as he sinned, yet he refrains from transgressing. This is a person who has done full teshuva. So what is full teshuva? We talk about Esau being about teshuva, one of repentance, one of return, one of fixing the world, one of fixing the difficult things. So when do you see full teshuva? This is the position that they are, and then they yet are able to overcome what before they didn't. So let's take a look now. What happened? Can you imagine the brothers' frustration? They are fully, in their eyes, fully justified for what they did. And they did not want to necessarily relinquish their preference of the idea that Jacob has a preference over Rachel. And now what happens? They come to this guy in Egypt, and he says, I want Benjamin. Benjamin is Rachel's other son. We took care of Joseph, but now we have Benjamin. And he says, go to your father and tell him I need Benjamin. He knows why did he not send Benjamin. And they know why he didn't send Benjamin. Was because Benjamin was the only remaining son of Rachel. And now here they are, they're in the Egyptian's viceroy palace, and the second child is condemned to slavery in a foreign land. And so it's seemingly repeating history again. Because now they have to see he's brought before them. He is being condemned. All they have to do is say, sorry, Dad, what could we do? They took him. What do you want me to do? But that's not what happens. This time they refuse to abandon Benjamin. And they themselves say, of all people, who gets up? Yehuda, Judah says, I am going to take him back no matter what. If it means I have to go and fight this entire castle myself, I will do it. Yehuda, Judah, the one who threw Joseph in the pit to begin with. Actually, not the one who sold Joseph to begin with. It was Reuben who threw him in the pit. But the one who, to begin with, Yehuda, Judah. And now comes, and he is the one of all people that says, I'm going to go as far as it takes. If I have to break the walls down in this place, I'm going to do it to save my brother Benjamin. Now Joseph says, okay, now I see that you did teshuvah. Now it's time. In a spiritual sense, what does it mean? It means that we could bring back the two factions of the Jewish people together. That whatever until now was broken, now I see that it's time for these two sides to meet. To bring together both sides of Jacob into one. And it doesn't end there. Historically, these were always the two factions of the Jewish people. You have the children of Rachel and the children of Leah. Service of the tzaddik and the service of the teshuvah. How does this play out? Well, you have two kingdoms. If anybody knows history, you have this also in your book for those who have a book. The primordial origin. Okay, this all goes back to the service of the tzaddik is tikkun, and the service of the tshuva is tohu. We've talked about that last week. So it really goes back all the way to the beginning of creation. God created the world in a way that we have to bring together these two worlds, the world of tohu and the world of tikkun. In the biblical personalities, you have Jacob, Rachel, and Joseph. Okay, now this is where it gets very, very interesting. Jacob, after obtaining Esau's blessing, becomes the service of the tshuva, and therefore he has Leah, and who is the leader of her children? The leader is Judah. Another food for thought. You'll look into this yourself, but you see, who was actually Leah's firstborn? Reuven. So how does Judah suddenly come to play? If you take a look at the stories of Reuven, again and again, tries to play Judah's position and fails. Reuven is the one who first throws Joseph into a pit, hoping to save him, but he doesn't. Reuven is the one who first approaches his father, says that I'm going to take responsibility for Benjamin. He says that if not, you can kill my two sons. And Jacob says no. He doesn't accept that offer. He accepts Judah's offer. We see other times Reuven as, so to speak, trying to be the leader of his brothers, but doesn't. It's another interesting factor in this whole story, but it's not the point over here. The divine dwelling was the next. Historically, what was the divine, and we're going to look at this in a moment, the divine dwelling, we'll look at that in a moment, but let's first take a look at all these things of how in history it all played out. Let me just... You're going to see the service of the tzaddik is the tabernacle, and the service of the tshuva is the holy temple. We're going to explain this soon why. In Judaism, you have the Torah and mitzvahs. The Torah represents the tzaddik, and the mitzvahs, actions, represents the teshuvah. In activity, you have learning in action and objective personal spiritual perfection versus repairing and transforming the world. And now we're going to explain these each in a different way. So let's take a look historically. Historically, you always had, if anybody learned the prophets, you see this always plays out. And Joseph. How did this play out? In the first part of history, sorry, I got to do two for each of these. In the first part of history, following the initial reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers, Judah acknowledges, okay, Joseph, you are the king. You are the boss. And for the first part of Jewish history, it was always followed the side of Joseph. Joseph was the first king of his brothers. Who was the first leader after Moses that actually took the Jewish people into Israel was Joshua. Joshua was from a descendant of Joseph. He was the first one to bring the Jewish people into Israel. Next, who was the very first king of Israel was King Saul. Who was it? Ben Yamini. He was from the family of Benjamin. Also the grandfather of Mordecai. That was after the destruction of the temple. Next, what happens? Samuel the prophet tells Saul, you messed up. Why? Because you didn't do to perfection the way God wanted. And that happens. He says now a new king is going to come, King David. King David. Saul kicks and screams, I don't want King David. He even tries to kill David.
Hey.
But what happens? David eventually takes over. So the transfer of leadership eventually happens. But what happens then? David's son, Solomon, takes over. And then for many, many years, there's a separation of the two kingdoms. the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, which is for many, many years, the separation of the two kingdoms. So you see, but eventually, when Mashiach comes, you're going to have the undisputed leader who is going to be who? Yehuda, Judah. Why? Because all our time in Galus and exile is going to be, our job is to perfect the world, to take the world of Tohu and bring it into a state of Tikkun. To take the world of the Baal Teshuvah and put it into a state of a tzaddik, that's the ultimate. We found this also with the two dwellings. Oh, okay. So you have Yeravam ben Nevat, Mashiach ben Joseph, then you also have Mashiach ben Judah, who's going to be the ultimate redeemer. Now we also have in the two dwellings, you have the Mishkan and the Mikdash. Now it's interesting, if you take a look at the Mishkan and the Holy Temple, the way they're built is a little bit different. The Mishkan, if you take a look in figure 4.2, you can see this as well. The tabernacle, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was made of a variety of materials which were arranged in ascending order. It begins with the earth floor. You see that? Then the silver foundation of sockets, the wooden wall panels, the tapestries of multicolored wool and flax, tapestries of woven goat hair, and then covering of animal skins. What does that tell you? You begin with the inanimate, then you begin with the vegetation, has a little bit more growth, a little bit more activity, a little bit more life, till finally the living beings, the animals. The temple basically is all made up of inanimate beings. It's made of stone, of mortar, stone and earth. So the structure did include wooden beams for support, but they were embedded within the building. And it was mostly stone, which is an earthly creation. Basically, message being, till today, you have the idea of Jerusalem stone. What is the idea? Saying it's an earthly creation, meaning that you are elevating the lowest facet of the world, elevating the lowest beings of the world, even that seemingly has no life. Now, the Mishkan was in the section of Shiloh, which was from the tribe of Joseph for many years, which is the domain of the children of Rachel. Then you have the Holy Temple, which is going to be built in Jerusalem, which was built in Jerusalem. It's going to be built in Jerusalem, which is from the tribe, a section from the tribe of Judah. So you're taking the lowest element of creation, the material world, and you're elevating it. So now we see, not only are all the stories of the biblical Torah connected, but the Torah is the story of the entire history and purpose of the existence of the world. Going back to the very, very beginning of creation, the Tohu and Tikkun, which we talked about last week, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't saying, it was messed up, let me fix it. No, what's the idea of Tikkun Olam? It means that we are taking the energy of Tohu, and for the past 5,000 years, we're working that in and bringing it into a state of Tikkun, which that's what a world of perfection is. A world of perfection is when you have both sides working together, seeing how they both contribute to the perfect world. That is why, as we see, I'm going to take this back. Okay, so here we have these things. You have, again, Joseph is the kingdom of Saul, the tabernacle, Mashiach ben Joseph. Judah is the kingdom of David, the holy temple, and Mashiach ben Yehuda. In other words, like this, you could say, to put it another way, Joseph is the path, but Judah is the goal. Spiritual self-improvement is the prerequisite for constructive engagement with the world. And this is the model of the idea of marrying both Rachel and Leah. Because notwithstanding Yaakov's greater love for Rachel, who ultimately was buried with Jacob? The answer, Leah. Rachel was buried on the way. Well, you know, Kever Rachel is a separate burial plot. It's on the way to Hebron, where the forefathers and mothers are buried. But she ultimately was not buried with Jacob. Who was buried with Jacob? Leah. Because ultimately, the idea is to reach Leah while using the path of Joseph, taking the lessons of the tzaddik and bringing that into the Baal Teshuvah. Let's read text 15, explains it very nicely. Joseph is only the preface. Accordingly, Mashiach, the son of Joseph, precedes Mashiach, the son of David, preparing the way for the son of David to come and complete the redemption. But Joseph does not complete the redemption. Similarly, although Rachel is the primary element of Malchut, the divine attribute of kingship, nevertheless, she was buried on the roadside and she does not complete the process. This is the deeper meaning of on the road. On the road means that you're getting there and ultimately you still have to find where it plays out in a more perfect way. And now, how does this play out in our lives? In our lives as well, we have these two sides. We have the spiritual life and we have material world. What is the way that we have to bring them both together? We bring them together by two things. You have learning and you have action. You have study and you have activity. Text number 16, it was already in the case of Rabbi Tarfon and the sages were assembled in the loft of Nitza house of Lod. When the query came before them, which is greater, learning or action? Said Rabbi Tarfon, action is greater. Said Rabbi Akiva, learning is greater. Included all, learning is greater because learning brings to action. So what does it say? Both are important. Doing mitzvahs, going out, reaching the world, doing things that are important for society, doing things that are mitzvahs are important. Sitting and studying, but this Torah study brings the action. Again, the same idea. The pathway to get to the perfection of making sure that your action is done right, making sure that what you're doing, the way you are elevating the world is done in the right way, that has to be with the prerequisite of studying Torah properly, knowing where it comes from, studying the source. So the ultimate goal is the action, but the way to get to the action is through the learning. And this is why you have to have both. It says, I'm doing a lot of good tikkun olam, I'm doing a lot of good deeds, I'm doing a lot of mitzvahs. Okay, but what are those things that you're doing? Is it just self-guided things that you decide are good? Or is it according to the way Torah is guiding you and telling you what is the way?
Prior to Hasidus, the Jewish learning was strict, the body was evil. You had to, deprive yourself of things, strictly just study where
Right.
Hasidus came along. Well, wait a minute, you have the physical and the spiritual, you have to combine the two.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is all based on the teachings of Hasidus. Hasidus is the one that brought this about. And so this is the idea of marrying the two worlds, bring the two together. We have to have Leah and Rachel. We have to have Joseph and Judah. Both are significant. And if you ask, if I were to ask what is the statement? So the answer is there's two mission statements of Judaism. One is the spiritual or religious objectives, and one is the I don't know what that is. One is the spiritual or religious objectives, and that is that we have to bring about a more deeper, meaningful relationship with God. We have to pray more. We have to work on ourselves to be a better person. We have to work on ourselves to have a more deeper, meaningful connection with our soul and with our purpose. Selfless, working on the sides of ourself that have to be fixed. Things like traits like selfishness, anger, laziness, greed, things that we have to work on ourselves. And this is one side, spiritual, religious perfection within ourselves. Then the other side is also improving the world, overcoming things that are being challenged in the world, poverty, illness, doing mitzvahs, going on the street. Like, recently you had Rosh Hashanah, right? And everybody's wondering, what are we going to do Rosh Hashanah during a pandemic? So Chabad, I'm just finished this thought. So if you ask any Chabad rabbi or many communities, they say, what did Chabad do? You can't come into the shul in some communities, not allowed to come into the shul, maybe have outdoor service or whatever. Many people still can't come. So what do? They took the shofar to the streets. They start blowing shofar at street corners or at parks or things like that. So you have the inside work, you have the shul aspect of Judaism, but you also have elevating the world. Yeah. Go ahead.
The aspect of having the spiritual life center, you can say you want to improve the material world, but then you can get lost in the state of the ends just.
Well, that's why you need both. That's why you have to have the proper.
Right. Without both, you can get that. The ends justify the means can lead you down a very dark path.
There's all this dispute going for years whether whether religious Jews should go to the army. So you have the far extreme who says the army is not good. You have the other extreme that says everyone has to go to the army. And the Rebbe's approach was, look, you have to do both. You could go to the army, but you also have to know that those students who are studying in yeshiva, studying Torah, their protection is the soldiers that are going to fight. So the soldiers are protecting them in a physical sense, and they're protecting the soldiers in a spiritual sense, and they're both protecting each other. If someone's not studying Torah, they're not in yeshiva, then they should go to the army. But the point is that you have both sides. You have those studying Torah, bringing the protection to the soldiers who are physically going out and fighting and bringing the protection in a physical sense. And both are needed and both are necessary. And so Joseph is the path and Judah is the goal. And this is how we reconcile both. And I see not only the stories of the Torah are, but that everything in history, in Jewish history, is all very much connected ultimately to the coming of Mashiach, which is the idea of taking both Judah and Joseph and bringing that again, but through Judah, not through Joseph. Okay.